This morning, I titled maybe that first part of this is we ought to be very careful how we treat one another in the context of this church, this gathering, this group of people who assembled together to learn more of God, learn what God wants from us, and learn how to go out and do what God expects from us. We ought to be very careful how we treat one another. This is not the Lions Club. This is not the FHA, and I ain't saying there's anything wrong with those things, but this right here is far superior than any other thing you can imagine, any other club, any other kind of assembly. This is important. We ought to be very careful and treat each other differently than we might be treated or treat somebody in the FFA or the 4-H or the Women's Club or the Lions Club or whatever. We ought to be different. I think we learned from text this morning. We ought to be very careful. There are misunderstandings. Sometimes simple little misunderstandings, sometimes vindictive understandings. And we found a prescription this morning of how to sort those things out, how to get to the bottom of it, and how to get it put behind you. And that's what we want to do, is get that sort of silliness put behind. It may seem silly to us, but you know, if it's got somebody in the church in a grip that they cannot fellowship with the church or with God or anything like that, it needs to be dealt with, no matter how trivial it may seem. Sometimes people run off at the mouth. Sometimes, honestly, when I feel good, I wonder sometimes if I felt my 30-year-old self again, how much I would offend people compared to my 54-year-old decrepit self. So I don't know if it's older age that's got me, careful with what I say anymore as when I was young. I don't know, but understand, it don't matter. We can all get bit by the misunderstanding, no matter how old or young you are. All of us. We are all capable of hurting people's feelings, and we are all capable of getting our feelings hurt. And I think we found a pretty good prescription this morning on how to take care of that. But there's more to the story. I am compelled to. I have to talk about the rest of the story. But to be Paul Harvey here, y'all know who that is. But some of you don't. We'll give you the rest of the story. And I entitled this Offensives, Offending, and Being Offended. You're like, well, didn't you cover all that this morning? No, I covered all that text this morning, but like I say, there is more text here for us to look at. But I want to look at it, have a little bit of context. If you would, turn with me to Matthew 16, or hold your finger on that place, of course, and then turn to Matthew 16. And verse 23. Matthew 16:23. Let's read that. But he turned, or Jesus turned, and said unto Peter, the first pope. I just seen if y'all was listening. Some of you were. He said unto Peter, Get thee behind me, Pope. No. Get thee, the great apostle Peter. What did Jesus say to him right here? Get thee behind me, Satan. Woof. What in the world? That's name calling right there, isn't it? I've always said, if God wanted to, he don't want to, but if he wanted to, he could come down here without any problem, without any rebuke at all, kick you in the face every day if he wanted to. Why can he do that? He's God. He made you. He can say and do anything he wants to. Why? Because we know that everything he says and everything he does is what? Right. Perfect. He says, Get behind me, Satan. Thou art a what? Offense to me. Jesus was offended. For thou savorest not the things that be of God, but those that be of men. Oh, offenses come, don't they? Get behind me, you Satan. You are an offense unto me. We're not going to go back and put all that in context and preach another sermon because I want to get through today's text. But if you would, turn with me to Matthew chapter 18. That's where we are. And it starts this text out, the text that we're going to be preaching through in a minute. Put it in context. Lessons of humility while holding a child. Y'all remember that? Y'all remember us going through that? He was holding a little child and he's talking about humility. In verses 1 through 3 it says, at the same time came his disciples unto Jesus, saying, who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? I mean, come on. Doesn't that seem a little bit childish and petty to you? But what did we say about these guys this morning? They were literally with each other all of the time. Eating together, praying together, reading together, listening to Jesus together, and working hard together. You know, with all the feeding of the thousands that they did. And here, all this work they're doing with Jesus. Who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? What is on your mind, disciples? Okay, we've done all this work now, Lord. Who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? And Jesus called a little child unto him, and set him in the midst of them, and said, verily I say unto you, except ye be converted to become as one of these little children, ye shall not enter in the what? Kingdom of heaven. Doesn't say heaven, does it? I've heard people say that. You're going to go to hell if you don't be like this. No, it ain't what that says. Don't confuse the subject of hell and the kingdom of heaven. They're two different things. Heaven is different than hell, and there's the kingdom of heaven. Become like one of these little children. So, what do we understand? We ought to be humble. You know what that means? You ever see two little kids get into it? How long does it take them to get over that? In 2 or 3 minutes, they're over it and they're back playing again, ain't they? They don't get their feelings hurt too bad for very long, generally speaking. We ought to humble ourselves. Little children are humble. Be like one of these little children if you want to enter into the kingdom of heaven. What's wrong with we don't have childlike humility? Why? We get so offended. We get so mad. We get a little big for our britches. They came and said, who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? What are you thinking about? What has got you? What is your problem? You're thinking about secular things. You're thinking about yourself wearing a crown. You're thinking about yourself holding a scepter. You're thinking about yourself handing out rules. Why do they do that? Well, I'll tell you why they did it. Because they're human beings and they're flesh. They're just like you and I. They were all working together and they came and said, who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? I think Jesus is going to get at it through this. Where's your mind at? What do you think? You think American democracy and kingdom of heaven is the same thing? I mean, they don't know what America is, but they understand government. They understand big shots. They understand kings and queens and princes. They understand all that. They can.